Thanks, guys. The title of today's message is Love Thy Neighbor If. Jesus taught us that we should love our neighbor as ourselves, but that presupposes we do in fact love ourselves. Otherwise, our neighbor is really out of luck. In this package today includes tolerance of both ourselves and our neighbor, as well as honoring both of us with our collective uniqueness. I know this sounds kind of dry, but I think we can have some fun with it. First, I just read that Forrest Gump died and he went to heaven. And when he got there at the pearly gates, he met St. Peter, who said, "Forrest, it's good to see you, but I have to tell you, heaven's getting pretty full. So we've instituted a policy where we have an entrance exam, and you have to pass the exam before you can come in. So I'm going to give you the 3 questions that you have to answer, and I want you to go home and think about it." So first, what days of the week begin with the letter T? Second, how many seconds are there in a year? And third, what is God's first name? Forrest comes back the next day, and St. Peter asks if he's had time to think about it. He says, "Yes, I have." The first one wasn't too hard. The number of days that start with the letter T is 2. St. Peter says, "Why did you say 2? Forrest says, "Well, the answer is today and tomorrow. That's 2. St. Peter said, "Well, that wasn't the answer I was looking for, but I guess you have a point. So I'll allow that." And let's see, how about the second one? How many seconds in a year? And Forrest says, "Well, I thought about that. It was a little harder. But I finally figured it out. The answer is 12. And again, St. Peter says, "How in the world could you come up with 12? And he says, "Well, that was easy, actually, after I thought about it. The answer is, it's 12 because there's January 2nd, March 2nd, etc. And that's 12. And so St. Peter again said, "Well, all right, I see your point. I'll accept that. But now, tell me the hard one. What's the answer to God's first name?" Forrest said, "Oh, I think I know God's first name. Everybody knows it. It says, it's in the prayer." Peter said, "What?" Yes, he said, "His first name is Howard." "What prayer?" It's the Lord's Prayer. It says, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." So then the gates opened, and St. Peter said, "Run, Forrest, run." So what's the message here? We may disagree on points, but we need to allow ourselves to be open to ideas and honor the uniqueness that resides in all of us, both ourselves and our neighbors. We should listen to people as we want them to listen to us, because number one, it's courteous. Number two, we might surprise ourselves and learn something. And if we want people to do that to us, we should do it to them. If St. Peter could do it for Forrest, we certainly should be able to do it. 1 Corinthians 14:16 says, "What then, brothers? When you come together, each one has a hymn, a lesson, a revelation, or an interpretation. Let us listen and see if we can learn." Every Sunday night, I have a Zoom meeting with my kids. It starts at 9:30 and sometimes goes to midnight. And you'd say, "Wow, how do you guys find enough to talk about for two and a half hours? Don't you know each other already?" And really, when it gets down to it, you know your kids when they're growing up and with you. You know what they want, you know what they don't want, you know their concerns, etc. But when it's adult children, we think we know them. We see them at Christmas or different places, but we never sit down and really talk to each other. So this has been a very educational experience for all of us, and we figured out that we dramatically differ with each other on political points. So we agreed up front that we would not talk politics. We have, however, morphed into a kindly discussion of points of view that's not so, this is the way it is. And it's never been a question that we love each other, but we have become more tolerant of each other and each other's ideas. I think we've learned that some of the ideas that we might have otherwise taken exception to, we've learned that they're not as different as we earlier thought. The conversation has morphed to the point where, while we love each other, and we know that, we love each other as we are, warts and all. This has been really helpful, I think, for me and for all of us, because we're not concerned with trying to impress each other. As a result, we have great conversations, and it's a lot of fun. And I'm just so glad we started that. Part of this message today is sharing with you some of the challenges that I've faced in my life, the times I've doubted myself, and people who've helped me realize that as the Bible says, we're all made in the image of God. It's been quite a journey, but I'm okay with who I am. We may not know what God's plan is for us, but we do know that who we are right now, today, is part of that plan. And we can only enjoy the ride if we embrace it. The Song of Solomon has a great quote in it. It says, "You are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you." Now think about this. If there's no flaw in who and what we are, no flaw, then if we think differently, the flaw is only in our own thinking. Jesus said, "Love thy neighbor as thyself." It's interesting because it presupposes that we already love ourselves, or we've matured to the point where we accept ourselves as we are, and we see our good points. And whether we want to admit it to ourselves, we all have many, many, many good points and good ideas. When we can look at ourselves in the mirror and smile, our ego becomes less important. And then we can look at other people and have thoughts about their goodness and our goodness. And we don't worry about, are we good enough? Then we can take time and really think about our neighbor as ourselves. An important part of our loving our neighbor, is tolerance. In the case where we say our neighbor, we really mean any human being. In today's world, there's not much tolerance for opinions that are different than our own, and it's a real shame. But learning how to be tolerant is part of the secret of learning how to love each other. What does it mean, really, to love each other or to love yourself? How do you actually love yourself? Well, there's a lot of definitions out there, but mine starts with first accepting myself as I am. I know I'm not perfect, and there's things that bother each one of us. We'd like to be better, handsomer, have more hair. But that's not what's important. If I'm made in God's image, I'm pretty well perfect to start out with. And that means wherever I am, and it's where I'm supposed to be. For various reasons, many of us find it easier to love others than to love ourselves. And sometimes we're quite awful to ourselves. We subject ourselves to a harsher inner critic, unhealthy relationships. I know how easy it is to dwell on our own personal inadequacies. I used to be sensitive about my lack of hair, and like a lot of guys, I just ended up combing it over and hoping nobody'd notice. One day my brother came up to me and said, "You really don't have to do that. It looks weird." So I took his advice and I just combed it back. And it was funny because I started accepting myself more the way I was, and it was really very empowering. So now I don't worry about it. In fact, I can joke about it. It's fun. Regardless of the reasons of our lack of self-love, it's time to start caring for ourselves and treating ourselves with the same love we give to others. Think about that, the same love we give to others. We'll help out a friend, we'll help out a family member, and we'll sit there and counsel them. We give them love, and in most cases, we end up accepting that person exactly as they are, but we don't give ourselves the same gift. Loving yourself isn't selfish. Not only does it improve our relationship with ourselves, but it shows others how to love us. If you are that one person, if you are the one person that you will always be with, so it's important that you learn how to enjoy your own company. Otherwise, it's a very dull friendship. Trust yourself. Recognize your good quality. Your relationship with yourself is the most important and lasting relationship you will ever have. It's worth spending time and an effort to develop a more loving relationship with yourself, so then you can learn to love others. We have to learn to accept ourselves as God made us, and then we'll discover that life is a lot more fun. We don't worry about a lot of things we did before, and we will realize that they weren't that important. Buddhists have a concept that they call suffering as two arrows. The first arrow is an unfortunate event that's happened to us, a painful arrow outside of our control, such as if somebody that we know has died of COVID. The second arrow is the story we tell ourselves about the event. This suffering is self-inflicted. Actually, it means not shooting ourselves in the foot with the second arrow is what we should be doing. If the first arrow could be a fact, it could be that we tell ourselves, or after the COVID death, we could tell ourselves, "Oh, I should have taken this friend to the doctor. I should have made them do this. I should have done this. I should have done that." That's the second arrow. And it's amazing how often we tell ourselves things all through life that are really second arrows. The first thing we could do nothing about, so it wasn't our fault. While we can be sad that that person died in that particular example, it wasn't our fault. So why are we beating ourselves up? Think about our attitudes. God made us who we are, and we're going to treat people with love, and that's the best we can do. So we should not ever think about inflicting that second arrow on ourselves. There is one thing we can learn from this. When we recognize what we're doing, we really should be asking ourselves, what can I learn from this? It helps us in future situations where we might inflict that second arrow again. As a personal example, I grew up friends with a neighbor girl, and our families were very close. And she was the closest thing to a sister that I ever had. And we grew up, and later we all went our separate ways. She lived in North Carolina. And for some reason, I started feeling that I should call her. And I said, yeah, I should. It's been several years since we talked, but I'm busy. I'll call her later. And I kept getting this message. It says, you better call her. But again, I said, well, I'm really busy today. I'll do it tomorrow. Then the next call I got was from her sister, who invited me to her funeral. So I beat myself up on that. But the message for me was, and I did go to the funeral, by the way, it was nice. The message for me was, if God's trying to send me a message, or I start thinking about someone that's far away or near, then I should call that person right away. They may need my help. They may just need some loving ideas. They may be sick, like Jane was, and just need to know that someone cares about them. So that lesson was a hard one for me, but it's one that we all should pay attention to, because actually we all get messages like this, and for most of us, we tend to ignore them. And especially if you keep getting those messages, you need to kick yourself in the rear and do that. I thought it'd be fun if we looked at some quotes from some people that most of us already know when they talk about loving themselves and what it takes. The first one is from Sandra Bullock, who said, "To accept ourselves as we are means to value our imperfections as much as our perfections." Steve Maraboli says, "Love yourself, forgive yourself, be true to yourself, and how you treat yourself sets the standards for how others treat you." As we said earlier, this is important because we are training other people on how they should treat us when they see how we're treating ourselves. Louise Hay is someone that most of us have read books from, and she always has something interesting to say. And she says straight out, "You've been criticizing yourself for years, and it hasn't worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens." Robert Morley said, "To fall in love with yourself is the first secret to happiness." And why is that? Because you really cannot love others completely until we love ourselves. We tend to get in our own way, or our ego does, in fact, and it's always saying, "Am I good enough? Are my clothes straight? Did I tell that joke right?" And that's very distracting, and it keeps us from really being relaxed enough that we can enjoy and love the people we're with. Jesus loved us unconditionally. Unconditionally. We should do no less. Diane Furstenberg is famous for saying, "You're always with yourself, so you might as well enjoy the company." And her message was about loving yourself. It's a lot more fun in life. Last quote is from Anne Marie in a song that she wrote, which says, "Don't feel like putting on makeup on my cheeks. Do I wanna? No. I love every single part of my body, top to bottom. I'm not a supermodel from a magazine. No. I'm okay with not being perfect." Good message. So today we've talked about how to truly love others. First, we have to accept ourselves as God has already made us. And with that comes tolerance for ourselves, especially ourselves. but also for others. We also have to have a willingness to honor the uniqueness in ourselves and in others, and be open to unique ideas that may be different from our own, because there's usually some wisdom in there. A kid comes, he's a young kid, his father's told him, "You don't fight regardless. Don't ever come home and tell me that you've been fighting." And so one day he had a fight. Somebody picked on him, and he supported himself, and he fought back. And so when he got home, he had to tell his father about that, and he was expecting the worst. And he rehearsed all of the things he was going to say, which he did say. And he sat the kid down, and after he heard the message, and he says, "Let me tell you something my daddy told to me." He said, "A father just doesn't love his son once in a while," and this would be his children. He loves them unconditionally. And so I want to pass that on to you, and I love you. And then later, as he grew up and got married, he had a son. And he was frustrated, and he said, my son was exactly like my daddy's son. Got into all sorts of mischief. And so the same thing happened when his son came home, and he sat his son down, gave him the same message, and said, "I love you." Then he said he had a dream. He dreamed he had died, and he was in heaven and standing in front of the pearly gates and waiting for St. Peter. And he said, "Wait a minute, there's got to be some mistake. If they know all the things I've done, they'll never let me in." And then he heard a voice from the other side of the gates. It said, same thing. "Let me tell you something about a father's love." So I think that kind of summed up what we talked about today. Have a good week.